Hi, I'm Susan Veasey, and the title of this lecture is The Lincolns, Love is Eternal. And today I want to talk about the personal life of President Abraham Lincoln, focusing on his marriage to Mary Todd and their children. And here you have probably the earliest photos of the Lincolns when they were a young couple, and you might wonder what they had in common. Well, there were several areas in which they match. They were both born in Kentucky, though they were 9 years apart. They lost their mothers when they were children. They were interested in intellectual pursuits, as Lincoln would read any book he could find, and Mary would excel academically in boarding school. Lincoln and Mary both enjoy the world of politics and like to talk about it. They each had one special talent. Lincoln could recite from memory long passages from Shakespeare's plays, and Mary could speak fluent French. They both may have had some form of mental illness. Lincoln would go into a deep depression. At one time, his friends worried that he was suicidal, so they would hide sharp objects or weapons from him. Mary suffered from paranoia and would grieve deeply the death of a loved one. She was a shopaholic and said that shopping brought security and comfort to her. Mary could be calm one minute and the next minute fly into a rage. Behind her back, a couple of White House staffers would later call her the Hellcat. Lincoln and Mary met in Springfield, the capital of Illinois, in 1839, when Mary came to stay a while with an older sister and her husband, who were well-to-do. Their home was the center of social and political gatherings, and the old story is that on one of these occasions, Lincoln saw Mary for the first time, and during the course of the evening, he told Mary he wanted to dance with her in the worst way, and Mary related to others that he certainly did. Over a year later, they became engaged, but as their wedding date neared, Lincoln got cold feet, and he wasn't sure if he truly loved Mary and whether he could financially support her from what he made in his law practice. After many months, they reconciled and were married on November 4th, 1842. Mary's wedding ring was engraved with the words, "Love is eternal," which I used for my subtitle in this lecture. A week later, Lincoln wrote a friend in a letter saying, "Nothing new here except my marrying, which to me is a matter of profound wonder." About 9 months later, they had their first of 4 sons, Robert Todd, or Bob, born August 1st, 1843. He would not have a close relationship with his parents as he grew up, as Lincoln traveled around Illinois trying law cases, and Robert was sent to boarding school in New England and attended Harvard University when Lincoln was president. And this is Robert Todd Lincoln, probably at the time he was attending Harvard University. He would join the Army late in the Civil War against his mother's wishes and would serve as an aide to General Grant. The second son, Edward Baker, or Eddie, was born in 1846, but would die from typhoid at 4 years old. Their third son was William Wallace, or Willie. He came in 1850 and was probably their favorite son. He was much like his father. He was calm, he liked to read books, he wrote poetry, and he had an interest in railroad schedules or timetables. The last son was Thomas, or Tad, born in 1853, and may have had a minor learning disability and did have a speech defect, possibly from having a cleft palate. You can see Tad here in his little military uniform that he liked to wear that was specially made for him. The Lincolns were like modern parents, as they did not believe in spanking or physically punishing their children. The Lincolns' finances improved in the 1850s as Lincoln would do legal work for the Illinois Central Railroad, so they were able to build a second story to their house in Springfield. Lincoln had been a congressman for one term in the late 1840s, but he became nationally known in 1858 during his campaign for the U.S. Senate through the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates, which he and his opponent, Stephen Douglas, had. Though Lincoln lost, this campaign would help him win the presidency in 1860. And this is a picture of their house in Springfield. See, the second story was added. On this day this picture was taken, they were celebrating that Lincoln had won the Republican nomination for the presidency in 1860. And taller than anyone else, there's Lincoln standing there by the door. Mary Todd is looking out the window here. And some say that this is Willie. He was recovering from a scarlet fever. And Tad was somewhere down in the crowd near his father. Mary Lincoln would be the first president's wife to be called First Lady, but life in the White House would not be as she hoped. Washington society looked down on the Lincolns, considering them to be country hicks. Mrs. Lincoln tried to impress the elite of Washington by overspending on new White House furnishings, china, and on her personal wardrobe of dresses and gowns. And here's two pictures of Mary Todd Lincoln. This is in one of the gowns that her seamstress, an ex-slave named Elizabeth Keckley, made for her. She would make her dresses, and Elizabeth Keckley was also a confidant to Mary. As First Lady, Mary would go to visit the wounded and soldiers in the hospitals around Washington area, and she also contributed to anti-slavery societies. Mrs. Lincoln liked to wear a crown of flowers around her hair. She liked to think of herself as a queen, and that others were supposed to be deference toward her. She wanted Lincoln to win a second term in office, mainly because she was hoping that it would delay the time he would find out about the shopping bills she had accumulated. Meanwhile, Willie and Tad found the White House to be their fun zone. As their father had said, let them have a good time. So after morning school lessons with a private tutor, the boys would hitch their nanny goat to a wooden ladder-back chair and ride this contraption around the East Room, scratching up the floor. They built a fort of sorts on the flat roof of the White House, and using a spyglass, looked at the soldiers encamped around Washington. They would also join the soldiers who were guarding the White House grounds and would do military drills with the soldiers. However, nearly a year later, after they had moved to the White House, the fun ended on February 20th, 1862, when Willie died of typhoid from possibly drinking unsanitary water. President Lincoln became close to Tad as Mary was too grief-stricken to be a parent to Tad. The boy would hang around with Lincoln in his office at night, falling asleep on the sofa, and Lincoln would carry Tad to bed. Months later, Mrs. Lincoln traveled with Tad, and while they were gone, Tad sent a telegram to Lincoln, and all it said was, "How is my nanny goat?" Lincoln sent a telegram back saying, "Father and goat are doing fine." And these are two pictures here of Tad and Lincoln taken together. Here you can see they're looking through a book there, and Lincoln looks like he, in this picture here, he looks like he's got his finger in a book, and there's a book on the table there, and Tad is wearing his military uniform, and they're looking toward each other. Mary held seances in the White House in hopes of reaching Willie and Eddie from the other side. Seances were popular then, as parents of a dead child wanted to make sure their child was okay beyond the veil. Charlatans took this opportunity to take advantage of grieving parents and put on a fake show. But Mary claimed while she was in the White House that Willie and Eddie came to her late at night and stood at the front of her bed. Mary was extremely jealous of Lincoln, and one night, as the Lincolns were getting ready for a White House social event, they talked about who was coming. Mary would tell the president that he could not talk with Mrs. S because of blah, 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 and he couldn't talk with Mrs. H because she was this or that. Finally, Lincoln said, "Well, Mother, who am I going to talk to? I can't stand around like a simpleton all evening." However, on another occasion, toward the end of the Civil War, Mary's jealousy and rage exploded for all to see. She and Mrs. Grant's carriage was late in getting to a military review of Union soldiers in Virginia. Mary found out that the attractive wife of General Edward Ord was on a horse riding next to the president and her husband in observing the troops. When Mrs. Ord came over to the ladies, Mary let her have it and called her vulgar names, causing Mrs. Ord to cry. In spite of the tensions and problems in the Lincoln's marriage, Lincoln once said, "My wife is as handsome as when she was a girl, and I, a poor nobody, fell in love with her, and I have never fallen out." And this is one of the last pictures taken of President Lincoln. You can see that the Civil War and Willie's death and trying to handle Mary had taken their toll on him. You can see the bags under his eyes, the sunken eyes as well, sunken cheeks, and there was gray coming in his hair. He was 56 years old at the time, but to me he looked like 76. A few weeks later, after General Robert E. Lee had surrendered to General Grant, the Lincolns took a carriage ride on the afternoon of that fateful night, talking about going to Europe, the Holy Land, and California, after Lincoln's second term was over. But one bullet ended those plans, as Lincoln died the next morning at 7:22 a.m. And Secretary of War Edwin Stanton said these immortal words, "Now he belongs to the ages." And this is a composite painting of the people that came in and out throughout the night as Lincoln was dying. I've been to the Peterson House, which is across from Ford's Theater, and you can still see the blood stain on the pillow where his head laid. And the room was small, and the bed was small as well, so only a few people actually could go into the room at one time. The years after Lincoln's death would be misery for Mary, as she and her sons moved to Chicago. Though she was reassured about her finances, she worried about having enough money while still spending it. She tried to sell the gowns and dresses she wore as First Lady to New York dress shops. Mary did take that trip to Europe with Tad in 1871, but not long after they came back, he died of tuberculosis at age 18. And this is a rarely seen photo of Todd as a young man, teenager. Mary would become more erratic, and Robert had her committed to a mental institution in the Chicago area in 1875, and she truly never forgave him for this. After 4 months, she was allowed to leave and would live with her sister Elizabeth until the death Mary wanted came in 1882. And this is what's called a spirit picture. This photographers would use some kind of trick or technique in which your dead loved one would appear as a ghostly or washed-out image standing behind you or next to you. And Mary considered this to be real. She was a spiritualist, and so she really believed Lincoln was protecting her and watching over her all the time. Robert would marry and have a family, and would serve as Secretary of War for 2 presidents. He was still living in 1922 when he witnessed the dedication of the Lincoln Memorial. He died in 1926, and there's Robert Todd Lincoln at the memorial to his father in Washington. Lincoln still lived with us. I've noticed in the past few weeks that members of Congress and the President have mentioned Lincoln in their speeches. And in February there will be a TV series, a documentary about Lincoln on CNN. And I noticed last year 3 new books on Lincoln were published last year, and already this year, 2021, there are 2 more books have come out in the early part of this year. But for this lecture, I used a couple of older books. This is called Mrs. Lincoln, A Life by Catherine Clinton. It's a good readable biography, and it has pictures throughout the book here. In an interview that President Clinton gave before he left office, he was asked, "What book would you recommend future presidents to read?" He said, "Lincoln" by David Herbert Donald. This is again another readable 1-volume biography about the man and the life he lived. I hope you have enjoyed watching this and listening to this video about the Lincoln family, and thank you again for watching. Good day.